We will start with the recording here. We also are from Leiden Law School, but also we have many participants online. And we have here two representatives from Qatar tax authorities, one from Qatar University, Mahmoud, co-organizer, Jason Rudall, who will be also presenting, and Tofik, who is a PhD at the Leiden Law School and working also in issues of taxation and his expertise. But today, yesterday we started with the discussion on what it meant to have, what is a CBAM, what are the responses of the CBAM. We look at the European law, international law. We'll also look at the trade law as well. And today, and the economics of it, and we look at the responses of countries, the implementation of CBAM. And today we want to move a little from that perspective and look at the green transition, look at the challenges in the green transition. And for that purpose, we have invited two scholars, one scholar, one policymaker, Rick Rosendahl from the University of Leiden, Department of Economics, and Regina Coelican from the Asian Development Bank. So I will say, Rick, you have approximately 15 minutes for your presentation, and the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Irma, and thanks for the invitation to present my paper here. So I do have to warn you a little bit, maybe. So this is really sort of an academic economics paper. I'm an economist, so it's going to be quite different from what we saw yesterday. The paper is not really specifically about CBAM or AI, but I'll try to link those topics to this paper kind of towards the end of the talk. Now, the name of the paper is Market Power, Innovation and the Green Transition. And so the motivation is sort of countries around the world have committed to ambitious climate policies, right? Think of the Paris Agreement and net zero targets. And to achieve those goals will require kind of radical innovation in many sectors of the economy, right? So not just renewable energy and electric vehicles, but changes across a large variety of sectors. And in this paper, the idea is that the policies kind of to achieve this, right, to achieve this green transition are going to affect market power. And now that can be the case for several different reasons, but the one I focus on here is technology lock-in effects. So some firms just rely more on fossil fuels than their competitors. And so if we make fossil fuels more expensive as part of the green transition, those firms are going to lose out against their competition, right? So you create winners and losers within industries. Now, in this paper, I try to do two things. First, I will show you some empirical evidence on this relationship between market power and clean and dirty innovation. So I'm going to look at a large data set of patent applications to say something about this. And what I find is that market leaders, so the largest firms within their industries, tend to be very much invested in dirty technologies, and more so than their competitors. So this technology lock-in is especially strong for those very large firms. Now, the second thing I do in the paper is to build a theoretical model that kind of tries to explain or incorporate the empirical findings of the paper. And there, what I find is that a carbon tax may, for some firms, incentivize to do more dirty innovation, kind of from a strategic point of view to protect their market share. And then overall, kind of the green transition will come with increased competition and innovation, kind of along the transition. Then I'll try to sort of relate the paper a bit to the topic of the workshop. So in the last bit, I'll try to say a little bit about AI and CBAM, kind of how they relate to the paper I'm presenting. So let's start with the empirical evidence. So for this, I use data from the Orbis intellectual property and historical data set. So this is a very large database, almost the universe of patent applications worldwide, and which I sort of count as patent family. So one patent family essentially protects one invention. Then I classify each invention as either clean or dirty or neutral based on the technology codes that are assigned by the patent officers. So this is all sort of following the literature on this topic. And the nice thing about these data sets is that, so the patents tell me something about innovation, right, and the direction of innovation, but I can link it to the firms, the applicant firms' balance sheets, which will tell me a bit about the market power of the firms. Now, the first result is that the direction of innovation is path dependent. So kind of your history of inventing matters for what you are going to do next. In particular, if you have invented a lot in dirty technologies, so fossil fuel technologies in the past, you are less likely to start innovating in clean technologies as a firm, and more likely to keep innovating in dirty technologies. The same goes through the other way around. Right, so if you're very good at clean, you're not going to start doing dirty. Right, so this is the type of technology lock-in effect that I'm talking about here. Then kind of the main result is here, result 2. So market leaders seem to be more invested in dirty technologies than their competitors. Here I'm going to compare just, well, for this graph, top 10 firms within their industry in their country to the next 10 firms, right? So the next 10 firms ranks 11 until 20. They're still large firms, just not quite the top firms in their industry. I'm plotting here the technology gap, clean minus dirty. So here a positive technology gap means you are better at clean than at dirty. Negative means you're better at dirty than at clean. So we find that kind of the leader firms in blue here tend to have these larger negative gaps. So they are more invested in dirty technologies. The small difference, right? So the gaps around 0 are more common for laggards. These are the kind of the more flexible firms that can switch more easily between technologies, right? So I run a number of regressions to sort of confirm this, and this really seems to be quite a robust finding. Now, the next question is sort of what does this mean for policy, right? So it seems to be that the firms that hold more market power, right? So the largest firms in their industries tend to be dirtier or more invested in dirty technologies, which means that they require a larger policy incentive to make the switch from dirty to clean production, right? And that in turn means that climate policy can affect market power within industries. What does that mean for the green transition? So to answer that question, I built a theoretical model. I won't bore you with all the details. But it's an endogenous growth model with directed technical change. Essentially, firms in the model compete for market share against each other by innovating, right? So next year they want to be more productive than they are now, and they can innovate either in clean or in dirty technologies. And kind of a key thing here is there is this path dependence. So your history matters, right? So if you have done a lot of dirty innovation in the past, then it is probably going to be more profitable for you to keep doing dirty innovation instead of switching to clean, although that also depends a bit on how strong the policy incentive is. Now, the first theoretical result is that for sort of strategic reasons, some firms may respond to a carbon tax by increasing their dirty innovation efforts. And that is because, well, the carbon tax, so I modeled the climate policy through a carbon tax here, it hits dirtier firms or harder than cleaner firms, right? So I think that makes sense. Now, if the leader in an industry is dirtier than the laggard, right? So essentially, relatively speaking, the tax is going to benefit the laggard firm, right? So it hurts the leader more than the laggard, which sort of puts them closer together in terms of marginal costs, which means it increases competition. And in this model, increased competition also leads to more innovation, because the gains from successfully innovating are largest when you're kind of close to your competitor, right? Because then you can overtake them or you can get a bit further ahead. Whereas if you're already very far ahead or very far behind, there's not much point in innovating because the gains are a lot smaller. And so if these dirty firms see that their green competitors come closer, they have a stronger incentive to innovate, to kind of stay ahead of their competition. So for essentially a strategic innovation motive, and they will do this, they can do this through dirty innovation. So that's how they can respond strategically to the tax by innovating in dirty technologies. But that is just kind of the case for some firms. So the next thing I do is I try to calibrate the model to the world economy, right? So to match some of the patterns that we see in the real global data, and I also use this pattern data I showed you before to set this path dependence. And then I simulate the effect of a large carbon tax, so of stringent climate policies. And these are essentially the results, right? So we see a drop in output, essentially, so GDP, essentially because we force firms to start using their clean technologies instead of the dirty technologies, which they are actually better at. And so that causes an initial drop in output, but also a big drop in emissions, of course. Kind of the more interesting findings are here on the second row. So you see a drop in markups. So markups here are price over marginal cost markups. So they're an indication of how much market power there is. So a drop in markups means a drop in market power, an increase in competition. Leading firms can are not able to charge as high prices as before because there's more competition for their market share, essentially. And this is again because the leaders in industries tend to be dirtier than the laggards, so the climate policy is going to put them closer together. Then, because of this drop in markups, we see an increase in R&D as a percentage of GDP. Again, because if firms are closer together in technology terms, the incentive to invest in R&D is larger. So overall, some firms may increase their dirty innovation, but along the transition, we see an increase in competition and innovation driven actually by clean, not by dirty innovation. So that's basically the main findings from the paper. Now, I thought over the past days a little bit about how to relate this to really the specific topic of the workshop. And here are some thoughts, but I'm very happy to hear if you agree or disagree with them. So I thought a bit about AI, which is not necessarily a clean or a dirty technology, right? It's not renewable energy or fossil fuels, for example. So I would, in this sense, classify it as neutral, although it seems to me that it may benefit clean technologies more than dirty ones, right? So there are a lot of applications of AI in electric vehicles, right? Smart charging, combination of batteries and renewable energy and so on, smart grids, which is something that well, if we have a look at my paper, we can expect sort of a similar response to this, if that's true, as to climate policies, right? So resistance by dirty incumbent firms that see this sort of as a threat to their market position, and so they are going to maybe step up their innovations in dirty technologies as a response to kind of protect their market share. Then CBAM. So if we look at CBAM from sort of the outside of the EU, right? So the Asian perspective, or actually the entire world except for the EU. I guess the interpretation through this model would be it's quite similar to a carbon tax, except that, well, you can avoid it by exporting somewhere else, of course, instead of the EU. So maybe a bit weaker, but essentially the incentives are going all in the same direction as a carbon tax. So if there is technology lock-in outside the EU, sort of the mechanisms in this model might still apply there as well. Although my impression is that the technology lock-in in Asia specifically might be weaker than in the EU or in the US. So most of the patent data I used for this paper is from the EU and the US and the UK, where technology lock-in seems to be quite strong. So there's kind of a long history of innovating in these dirty technologies. That might be less so the case in Asia, right? So if you look at what's kind of the very quick developments that are happening in China right now, it seems to be that this technology lock-in, these vested interests by fossil fuel firms may be less of an obstacle there, which is a good thing, of course, right? So that makes the green transition a lot less costly. So those are my thoughts about sort of the relation to AI and CBAM, but I'm happy to kind of discuss further if there's time for questions later on. So sort of the key conclusion of the paper is that considering these strategic incentives of large incumbent firms is key to a successful transition. And I think that holds true both for Europe and Asia. And then both AI and CBAM might sort of trigger these strategic incentives by incumbent firms for different reasons. So that's it for me. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Rick. I think that this shows also the reaction of business, and thank you for taking the challenge of looking at other perspectives from the green transition and using the CBAM AI in Asia. I will give now the word to Regina Coelitan. You wrote a very, very interesting blog, and that's the reason why I ask also, not only because you are from the Asian Development Bank, but also because you have very interesting thoughts on how to curb artificial intelligence in sustainable energy appetite. So the floor is yours. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat, and we will see at what time we can have time to answer those questions. We do it in the chat. Thank you so much, Regina. The floor is yours. I will share.
Thank you, Irma. Kindly share my presentation, please. So hello, everyone, and thank you for giving me a chance to present in this presentation. Similar to Rick, my work is not directly related to CBAM, but I hope you find some important insights through this. I'm Regina Tan. Maybe a brief introduction first. I'm an Associate Information and Research Officer from the Asian Development Bank, and my work in the bank entails providing access and managing information resources to help staff make evidence-based decisions. I'm also a certified information professional, and my background is on economic policies focusing on knowledge and innovation. So my presentation today, as Irma mentioned, is on my work regarding the 3 strategies to curb artificial intelligence insatiable energy appetite. Irma, kindly go to the next slide, please. All right, so this is a fast and moving and evolving industry, so I thought it would be remiss of me not to provide an update since my work was published roughly last year. So that's what my presentation will be mostly focusing on. So updates on AI's energy consumption, as well as the 3 strategies to address it. Next slide, please, Irma. All right. So first, in making the model and in model training. So recent research points towards really a significant increase in computing power and energy consumption from AI model training. As you can see on the chart on the left, there's really a sharp increase, especially since 2010, the deep learning era, in training compute of AI models, which has been growing at a rate of roughly 4.4 times per year, or doubling roughly every 6 months. The driver of this increase is additional spending by the largest AI firms for their large AI models, as well as improvements in GPU hardware performance, quality, and a shift towards longer training runs. Not surprisingly, if we look at the chart on the right, for AI model training, we also see power requirements of AI training compute rise. It's slightly slower than that of the training compute due to hardware efficiency, but it's still doubling annually. Next slide, please, Irma. Okay. So in terms of inference, we also see research has shown that there has been an increased intensity in the adoption rate of AI usage. This is especially for user-facing applications. So perhaps you've also experienced it. You've opened your smartphones, you've opened your favorite applications, and then suddenly there's this new AI program or um, functionality that is deployed in your smartphone or gadgets. As an information manager professional, we also see this in our electronic resources. We see waves of AI deployment being pushed by our vendors. So it's no wonder that cloud giants have attributed a significant percentage of their AI related carbon footprint and energy use is due to inference. Unsurprisingly as well, ChatGPT is now the fifth most visited website in the world. This chart on the left shows the amount of energy consumed by various AI tasks. And if we combine this observation with the amount of users for ChatGPT, which is roughly around 10 million per day. Research also suggests that the amount of energy used in training the AI model is easily surpassed by the inference use of users, very quickly surpassed. So, of course, this is just an oversimplification of the facts that we know so far. However, looking at the increased adoption of AI by the world across industries, it's very likely that our AI footprint today is the smallest that it will ever be. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this one, as we see an increase in training, deployment, and use of AI, we also see the opposite trend with regards to disclosure of information. In fact, less information is being disclosed with regards to the environmental impact of AI over time. In 2025, by the first quarter, majority of notable AI models have now fallen under the no disclosure category. Next slide, please. On a more positive note, we have seen that AI has become more efficient as performance and techniques develop over time. So for this one, I wanted to start with DeepSeek. I'm sure everyone is familiar with DeepSeek. It created a splash and shocked markets earlier this year when it claimed that it developed an AI model at a fraction of a cost relative to its competitors or other major players in the industry. Many experts call this a watershed moment. But in fact, if you look at the chart on the left, you can see that actually the DeepSeek development tracks with the broader trend of increasing efficiency in the AI industry. And what's important to note here is that this and by the way, that efficiency is because of the innovation with regards to engineering techniques such as the mixture of experts architecture, optimized distillation, and others. What is interesting about this development is that this demonstrates that improved performance could be decoupled from the amount of data and computing power. So performance does not rely solely on scale. And in here, we can see that driven increasingly by smaller models, this trend shows that how competition and innovation will make AI cheaper and more useful in the long run. Next slide, please. So another technology that we are seeing increased performance and efficiency is on AI chips or the GPUs or the graphic processing units. This development has actually seen a shift or changes in data center design, which are now highly dense, liquid cool, and require 10 times as much power. If you look at the chart on the left, you can see that the older designs of data centers are more packed. So these are packed with servers, rows of servers or network racks. These are basically the IT equipment used in the cloud workloads. But if you look at the figure beside it, you can see that now the design the layout of the space now uses more space for the power equipment powering these data centers and also the cooling equipment to keep it stabilized. So that's one of the changes in response to the increase in the performance of the AI chips. Another interesting development is the size of these data centers. So in 2023, the median size for data centers is 3 megawatts. By 2024, the new built facilities median size is around 54 megawatts, which is an 18-fold increase in size. So how does it impact the players? We see that players are adjusting with regards to these changes. In fact, in those images there, in the slightly middle one, we see Meta actually demolishing a site in 2023. So this is a satellite image uh, using an old design so that it can redesign the data center to for the higher power chips that is now available in the market. Next slide, please. And now finally, we arrive at the forecast for the amount of energy supply needed by artificial intelligence and data centers. So the most popular one that is widely cited is the one by the International Energy Agency, which is about 1,000 terawatt hours by 2030. However, in the figure on the left, we see a range of forecasts actually. And this is because of the lack of disclosure and the amount of energy that's really consumed by this data center. So we can see forecasts going fourfold by 2030, but we also see more conservative forecasts of doubling two-folds only. So IEA's estimates is actually more on the conservative side. And other estimates look into the amount of power needed to accommodate this new data center facilities. For example, Bloomberg New Energy Finance estimates an additional 362 gigawatts of power plant capacity, which is needed by 2035 in order to accommodate the additional needs of the data centers. So probably you're asking what type of power will these data centers use? So far, renewable energy still is the fastest growing source of this energy from needed by the data centers. They they contribute about half actually, and this is mainly due to the solar and wind deployments. However, at the same time, the other half is being serviced by the use of fossil fuels, thus prolonging the use of fossil fuels in order to accommodate rather the additional demand, especially in the next 5 years. Next slide, please. So now that I have presented rather updates with regards to AI's energy consumption, now I'd like to go into the strategies to address their energy appetite. So these are the three ones that I have mentioned in my work, and I will provide an update one by one. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, okay. So the first one is to establish standardized methodologies for tracking resource consumption and carbon emissions and increase transparency across the AI lifecycle. From my presentation, and as mentioned earlier, not having transparency and disclosure across the AI lifecycle, whether it's training models, inference, data center energy consumption, it really affects the estimates and therefore the evidence-based decision making of stakeholders like governments, policymakers, and even us users. And this is what bodies like the Coalition for Sustainable AI are trying to address. So they're trying to bring together players, different stakeholders, international organizations in order to ensure consistency, standardization, and best practices with regards to ensuring that AI's benefits outweighs the resource that it consumes. So, for example, one of their work is this published work on the standardization for AI environmental sustainability, where they include parallel efforts of bodies that are best suited to provide guidance to governments and other industry members on standards with regards to AI, such as the ISO, OECD, IEE, and ITU. Tools are also being developed in order to measure the environmental impact of AI. As I mentioned earlier, measurement is necessary for evidence-based decision making. And an example of this is the AI Energy Score project, where they have a standardized methodology to compare models across different AI tasks because they do consume different types of electricity and different amounts of electricity. And these metrics are similar to what you would imagine when you buy an appliance, the energy efficiency rating. So that's what they're trying to do. And they're trying to push for complete methodological transparency so that empirical evidence will be available in the future to really uncover, to do further studies on AI's environmental impact. Next slide, please. So the next strategy is mindful deployment of AI. So in this one, we take into consideration the costs and benefits of developing and using this technology for a specific purpose. So it's imperative to understand that not all problems require a machine learning solution, and solutions did not have to be high-tech. For AI and other emerging technologies, the rate of technological innovation is really accelerating as we speak. However, not all countries are digitally mature to take advantage of this technology. And especially those countries that are not digitally mature, they run the risk of losing investments when they invest on an advanced solution and they are not ready for the deployment of this solution. So in this case, it would be better to provide simple solutions of more established and widespread technologies, for example, mobile messaging, in order to provide a more effective solution to a problem, while strengthening foundations on digital infrastructure skills and policies for this low digital mature countries. Another important consideration is meaningful application of AI. As we have seen in the previous slides, performance could be decoupled with scale, and various tasks consume different levels of electricity. Likewise, studies suggest that performance as a function of scale varies across the tasks, as you can see there on the figure on the right. So this means that different tasks requires models of different sizes, and usage does not necessarily require scale. So for example, in the field of healthcare, which we hope AI will contribute positively, studies have shown that statistical models like logistic regression can achieve the same performance as deep learning. For example, in providing in estimating the seizure outcome after epilepsy. So in this case, this is rather due to the data scarce context of these environments in which AI models can easily overfit. Next slide, please. And then the third strategy involves setting regulatory frameworks that address the transparency and accountability responsibilities of stakeholders. So, as AI becomes more and more ubiquitous and part of everyday life, we see regulations inform the action of players in the industry, especially in this rapidly evolving industry. And in the span of the years since I've worked on this topic, I've seen several changes in the space. For example, the United States very recently issued a 28 plan entitled Winning the Race, America's AI Action Plan, which is largely hands off, pro innovation, and a regulation light approach. this is a departure from the previous administration's AI governance guidelines. In the previous administration, they issued an executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of AI. And the current administration has pivoted towards this pro-innovation approach. On the other hand, the European Union has enacted the EU Act, AI Act rather, which is a risk-based approach to AI regulation, highlighting transparency and ethical use of AI. It's actually part of a 10 digital regulation that it's actually part of 10 digital regulation that the AI has introduced, aimed at creating a cohesive and secure digital environment. In Asia, we see countries cautiously positioning themselves between the two approaches. For example, in the People's Republic of China, we see another model of another approach rather to AI, which promotes state supervision, supervisory access, and content safety approach, rather than corporate transparency to the public. So it's primarily a government-facing transparency. If you can see on the chart on the left, another important area in regulating is another important area to regulate rather is the resource consumption of data centers, which we have already seen in other established Asian markets. As we have established in this presentation, data centers consume a lot of resources, which means that not only do they create environmental risk, but they also create social risk. Social risk because they create competition with regards to the use of these scarce resources. And in response to that, Asian governments in established markets are already requiring specific requirements in relation to the resource use of data centers, starting with power, but moving on to water resources in the future. Studies point towards countries prioritizing actually build out of data center infrastructure rather than resource efficiency and net zero targets, at least in the short run. But these types of regulations will be crucial for the sustainable growth of the sector. Next slide, please. All right, so here are the information presented today. Here are the rather references for the information presented today, including my work. Thank you for your time and attention, and I hope you found some valuable insights through this. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. I think that your presentation has been wonderful because we started first with the challenges with business, with clean data technology, green taxation, and now we look at the AI, and the next presentation will be by Jason Rudolph from Leiden University, and it's a call for due diligence on environmental impact of the use of AI. So your presentation gives the reason why Jason is here. So I'm very happy that sometimes things work like this. Let me I just have one question now in the chat from Suranjali to Rick. So there you have 3 questions, but if you can just answer that in 2 minutes max would be great. Otherwise, we can continue with the chat because we need to have the other 3 presentations. I thought this is very important. Regina, I would suggest you if you can just also, if they have any questions for Regina, please ask them in the chat. But I would also try to make some room after Jason's presentation because it would be very interesting to combine the 2. So Rick, we have 3 questions from Suranjali. What are the assumptions on the cost of technology and what will that change impact results? The second question is, when you compare leaders with laggards, do you compare for each sector? Because mining and resource-based companies are so large corporations with market dominance. And the third question, while technology lock-ins are estimated, how do you consider efficiency improving tech? So as you see, Rick, your presentation raised 3 interesting questions. Unfortunately, you only have 2 minutes to answer this, but you can also answer in the chat. So it's for everyone also. You can give more information on the chat. Thank you, Rick. Please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for the great questions. So I'll be very quick, and then if there's anything left to discuss, we can do so by email or outside this workshop. So question 1, so way I model it is essentially there is a technology ladder within each sector, and this sort of the step size is fixed. So each innovation adds the same sort of efficiency in this model. And that means that you get this gap between where you are on the clean and the dirty technology ladder, and that will determine how high the tax has to be sort of to induce this shift. So it's quite sort of abstract, but I guess so. If in the paper there are some details to make this clearer. Then question 2. So this is sort of the average across sectors. So there may be sectors where it's the other way around, right? So the leaders are cleaner than the laggards. If we average across the sectors for which I can gather the data, then see that leaders tend to be dirtier. And then 3, energy or efficiency. So this is considered, right? So all innovations in this model are improving efficiency. There's a bit of discussion sometimes about technologies that improve energy efficiency of fossil fuel machines, right? Should they be considered clean or dirty? Here they are dirty, essentially because they're not in line with net zero, which would require kind of a complete move away from fossil fuel technologies. Yeah, so that is the short answer. But if you have any more questions, please do let me know.
Thank you so much. Yes, I forgot that Regina has to leave for another meeting because she just left just to be with us. But if any questions, just please ask them in the chat and I will send it to Regina per email, and you will have also access to the recording with the presentation of Jason. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Irma, and everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. And we will continue with the second part. So then we know that there is a problem with artificial intelligence. We know that there is a problem with data centers. We know that there is a problem in environmental sustainability. We just have seen that. And we also challenge the business to think differently. But then the question is, what can be done? And then I think that the first person who can help us with that question will be Jason. So Jason, please, the floor is yours. Do you want to speak from the computer?
Yes, I'm just trying to turn the... I think I have it. Can everybody hear me okay? Maybe I'll turn my audio off.
Sorry. Yes, we have an echo here, but Jason will speak up from here, sharing also his slides there. So please let us know if you can hear him. Otherwise, we ask Jason to move a little further. Yeah.
Is that better? Can you hear me okay? Yes. Getting some nods. Great. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Irma, for inviting me. I've learned a lot over these 2 days on both CBAM and on AI. And I'm particularly grateful to Regina because I think she's really set the scene with this very rich presentation. So I'll try to complement as much as I can. And my presentation this morning is really based on a paper I'm writing with Professor Heng Wang at Singapore Management University. We've been working on it now for a few months, still in its early stages, but it's progressing, and would be very grateful for any feedback that anybody has. So, of course, as we know, AI is described as this sort of general purpose technology that will transform and have an impact on every sector. And like all other waves of industrialization, the AI transformation will come with a significant environmental footprint. And I mean, what struck us was that, you know, there's been a lot of attention on AI's sort of ethical and economic impact. but its environmental footprint really remains curiously under-examined, and I think crucially under-regulated, particularly at the international law level. And I think international law has a special role to play if we are to prevent a race to the bottom. You know, we see states really jostling to attract AI investment and become AI hubs, and we need to prevent this race to the bottom. And I think international law can play an important role there. So our argument, and what I will argue this morning, is that states already have an obligation of due diligence under international law. And from this duty of due diligence, there is a corresponding duty to conduct environmental impact assessments. And I think we need to tailor this obligation to sort of large-scale AI infrastructure projects and policies. And I think that there is a real need to develop more tailored regulation at the international level to adopt and adapt to AI challenges. So AI is really a double-edged sword for the environment. It has benefits. We might think, for example, of the role that it plays in climate modeling, in optimizing renewable energy use, in monitoring deforestation, tracking wildlife changes, and changes in biodiversity. So there are sort of intended benefits that can come from AI use. But at the same time, AI, of course, has an environmental footprint that is really unlike any other technology. And it comes with significant environmental costs. And first and foremost, as we've just heard, and I won't repeat what Regina has just said, but energy consumption is huge at all stages in the AI life cycle. So data centers in particular are energy intensive, very energy intensive. In fact, a large scale data center can consume the electricity of about 100,000 homes. And specific AI requests, relatively simple ones, are on average 10 times more energy intensive than a Google search, just to give a sense of how much more energy intensive they are. And I think there's a particular issue with energy consumption in Asia. China accounts now for nearly half of all global AI computing power. But we know that 60% of China's energy mix still comes from coal. Similarly, in India, India's AI sector is expanding very, very rapidly, but its energy grid relies very heavily on coal as well. Singapore, for some years, paused the construction of new AI data centers because of concerns around energy constraints. It's now lifted that pause, but the impact on the grid remains quite acute. And Regina very helpfully, I think, showed us how various AI technologies are becoming more efficient. We saw that with DeepSeek. But we have to be wary of what is called the Jevons paradox, which is this idea that the more efficient systems become, the more they drive consumption up. And we already see this with AI. I mean, AI is becoming much cheaper, much faster, and we see an exponential uptake in demand. But beyond energy, of course, AI is water intensive. I mean, AI's water use is really astonishing, actually. There are estimates that suggest the training of ChatGPT-4 consumed several million litres of fresh water. And in the next few years, AI use worldwide will amount to 6 times the consumption of water that Denmark uses. So this is really quite an acute problem. And in Asia, of course, there are already a number of regions that are water stressed. We think of northern China and India and Central Asia. There's real water scarcity already there, and whether they can support data centers that are hugely water intensive is a real issue. Minerals, of course, critical minerals in the manufacturing of semiconductors. Not only are these already almost exhausted in some parts of the world, and particularly in Asia, but we know that the mining of these minerals causes widespread ecological damage, and it comes with human rights abuses oftentimes. So we need to be mindful of that too. And then e-waste, the end of the AI life cycle, is still a huge issue. Think of the servers and the chips and the batteries that all need to be disposed of. And this is often taking place informally, in informal economies, and often in countries like India and Pakistan, also in countries across Africa. And this causes, widespread toxic pollution. So turning to the international legal framework then, international law doesn't explicitly regulate AI at present, but there are several existing principles, a number of rules and certain tools that should already apply to the development of AI infrastructure and national policies that speak to AI. Now, international environmental law in general is built on the principle of prevention. This is the idea that states must prevent significant harm to other states or to the global commons, the atmosphere, the seas, air, etc. Now, some harm is tolerated. It has to be, it's inevitable. That comes with economic development. But states are expected to exercise due diligence in mitigating the risk of significant harm to the environment. And this obligation of due diligence has been underlined and developed and elaborated by a number of international courts and tribunals over the last 15 years or so. And most significantly this summer, just in July actually, the International Court of Justice based here in The Hague handed down a very significant and eagerly awaited advisory opinion on climate change. And it elaborates at length on the content of the obligation of due diligence. So states will need to be mindful of this as they develop their AI infrastructure. Now, environmental impact assessments are really the procedural backbone of this duty of due diligence. And under international law, environmental impact assessments require the assessment of environmental risks before large-scale projects and policies go forward. Now, the legal rules around environmental impact assessments were developed really for quite different projects, for industrial projects like dams and plants and pipelines and mining projects and so on. But I suggest they need to be extended and developed and tailored to apply to the development of large-scale AI infrastructure, and EIA needs to be applied in a much more systematic way to these AI infrastructure projects. I should also say, just in passing, that I think the well-known Basel Convention has a role to play in dealing with e-waste, but I won't elaborate on that today, but just for sort of completeness in presenting the legal framework. So why do environmental impact assessments matter for artificial intelligence? Well, I think they can play a really important role in addressing, the environmental footprint of artificial intelligence, particularly in things like evaluating where data centers should be sited. Could expose, for example, considerations in countries like, they shouldn't be sited in very arid regions, but rather in sort of renewable rich areas. They could be particularly helpful in appraising the impact of semiconductor fabrication plants, also in assessing transboundary risks. Think, for example, of the transboundary nature of the Mekong River and the various pressures that are on this river. And if you have various riverine countries drawing from it, we need to have a sense of the impact that has at a transboundary level on the river. And then quite importantly, I think EIAs can play a really important role in including communities in environmental decision making. International law actually is very clear on the idea that the public and particularly sort of indigenous communities should have access to information, but also have a say in environmental decision making. And then finally, I think EIAs have a role to play in guarding against what might be termed digital colonialism, where local environments and communities might be expected to bear the costs of big tech unfairly. But the problem is that there are a range of mismatches between conventional EIA processes and the particularities of AI infrastructure development. So in our paper, we characterize these mismatches as spatial mismatches. EIAs are usually project specific, but with AI, its impacts can span supply chains from rare earth mining to the server disposal, the e-waste component. There are temporal mismatches. So conventional environmental impact assessments assume stable projects, but the thing is, AI projects evolve very, very fast. So a one-off EIA cannot capture the dynamic impact and the evolving impact that AI has. So iterative assessments will be really, really important. And then finally, there are functional mismatches, and this builds on something that Regina mentioned earlier on. AI's footprint is very hard to quantify, both its energy footprint, its water footprint, its emissions footprint, etc. There's no real harmonized approach to metrics here. And Regina mentioned some non-state initiatives, but different states use very different methodologies. So there needs to be some harmonization here if we are to improve the EIA framework around AI. And the problem is international law actually has fairly little to say about the content of the EIA obligation. And this is something that really needs to change, because, without some defined content, EIAs risk becoming just a box-ticking exercise and not sort of meaningful safeguards. So in the paper, we develop 7 principles that we say should govern the conduct of EIAs in the context of AI infrastructure. So the first principle is we say there should be an assumption that large-scale AI projects require environmental impact assessment. The second is that we say there should be precaution. So where environmental impacts are uncertain, states must be risk averse. The third is continuous monitoring, so iterative environmental impact assessments that really evolve as projects scale up over time and change. The fourth is disclosing scope 1 to 3 emissions, looking at water withdrawals, but also other issues in the entire supply chain. This is really, really important. Fifth, looking at the entire life cycle of AI development, from mineral extraction to the manufacturing of semiconductors to e-waste disposal. This needs to be captured in environmental impact assessments in a very systematic way. Sixth then is transparency and participation, making sure that the public who are affected, all stakeholders have their say. They have access to information, but also they have a role to play in environmental decision making. And finally, then the development of harmonized standards, global metrics on AI's energy, water, and waste impact. Oh yes, very good. So there are a few normative developments. There's a number of instruments that have been developed. Regina also touched on a few of these. The problem is that while they can be used to sort of interpret existing hard obligations under international law, and of course they provide some sort of normative guidance for states, they are not binding, apart from the EU's AI Act at the EU level. They are mostly regional initiatives, so there's nothing at the universal level. And oftentimes they are sector specific. And importantly, they lack enforceability. So there is no binding international treaty at present that regulates AI. And I think there is a real need for a binding multilateral instrument that deals comprehensively with AI's environmental footprint. All of these instruments that I have on the slide there only touch, often in a very tangential way, on sustainability and environmental impact. There is no detailed regulation or suggestion as to how states should regulate the environmental impact of AI. So this is really missing, I think, in the normative fabric of AI regulation. So, I mean, just to conclude, AI is both a critical tool for sustainability, but also a major source of environmental stress. We need to extend environmental impact assessments to AI infrastructure policies and projects. As the law presently stands, we need to tailor international law regulation around AI. And I suggest this is best done through a multilateral treaty that is exclusively focused on AI's environmental footprint and crucially has binding standards. So I leave it there for now. Look forward to any questions and comments, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Jason, because I think that you gave us also the international law perspective, but also the possibility of countries being responsible and having also the environmental impact assessment. I think that it gives a lot of food for thought, also looking at the responsibility of countries but also business in that regard. And we will now go to the geopolitics. Please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and we will try to make one or two questions here in the room. So please go ahead, Javier. You have 20 minutes for your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Mosquera. We really appreciate the opportunity to be here. We share some projects in the past. I remember that you contributed with us in a European project, also in Brussels, also in climate change and all those topics with Professor Marta Villar. And now, well, I feel very happy to have the opportunity to share with you some ideas. It's because I haven't prepared a presentation, because I prefer to only to put on the table some reflections, and maybe I'm pretty sure that we have the possibility to continue with discussion not only in this forum but also in the future. Well, those ideas are the result of a national project that we are doing here in Spain, leading by Professor Marta Villar, about carbon pricing in strategic EU sectors, joint use of regulatory and fiscal instruments in the fight against climate change. And as Professor Mosquera already said, I would like to share with you some legal aspects of carbon pricing in strategic sectors in the global scenario, and the global challenges. It's the result of a recent book that we have already published in the project. And it's also connected with some ideas that we have discussed yesterday in the forum also. Well, as you already know, sustainability policies at this moment are undergoing in a moment of profound transformation. At the international level, a radical shift can be observed in the orientation of certain powers. Of course, with a substantial modification of the foreign trade and environmental policies. However, this term has even led to a redefinition of the sustainable, which in some contexts has a quite a negative connotation. In contrast, in our case, in the European Union, which despite still being a reference point, face internal tensions. As you also know, the legislative package Fit for 55, one of the cornerstones of the Green Deal here, was designed in a context prior to the conflict of Ukraine and also in the recent change in the European political balance. Nowadays, there has been a relative decline in political consensus around the green agenda. And also, recent reports suggest that the climate agenda must be complemented by a strategy of competitiveness and reindustrialization here, not only in the European Union, but also in other regions in the world. So the energy transition poses a series of structural challenges. The key objectives are, of course, decarbonization of the electricity system, electrification of demands, improvement of flexibility, and also the development of storage systems. To achieve these goals, we need at least the following points. High levels of financing, regulatory stability and certainty in returns. Also an expansion of access to electricity grids. It's crucial for industrial electrification. We need also revision of the remuneration scheme for energy storage. It could be also need a resolution of growing social conflicts related to renewable energy projects, which generate local resistance, as you know. And finally, maybe we need some guarantee of a just, equitable, and inclusive transition, supported by regulations that recognize the promotion of renewable as an overriding public interest. It's also because we can assure that the role of governance in climate policy is one of the bases. Here we have several papers in the academia. I think that it's a very interesting one called Do Geopolitical and Energy Security Risk Influence Carbon Dioxide Emissions? Empirical Evidence from European Union Countries. And in this paper, this paper has shown that the reduction of carbon dioxide emissions is a global priority given their direct influence on climate change. while previous studies have identified economic growth and energy consumption as determining factors in the increase of emissions, there is still a lack of clear understanding regarding the role played by geopolitical risk and also energy security in this process. So from the perspective of governance, it is essential to recognize that it plays a crucial structural role within the regulatory regime and also supported by principles such as efficiency, stability, flexibility, predictability, and accountability. These principles must also guide the design and implementation of carbon pricing mechanisms in the future. Why it's so important, the geopolitical risk? It is relevant to incorporate the concept of geopolitical risk to understood as threats or actions arising from armed conflicts, terrorism, or international disputes, and their possible repercussions on the economy and carbon emissions. Complementary energy security risk should also be considered, which refers to the ability to ensure an affordable and sustainable energy supply. Also, some studies indicate that an increase of the geopolitical risk may have a reducing effect on emissions due to the slowdown of economic activity. However, other research argues that the geopolitical risk can lead to an increase in emissions by encouraging the use of more polluting fossil fuels for reason of energy self-sufficiency. With regards to ESR, the data reveal that first, it has a positive and statistically significant impact on emissions in the long term. Moreover, ESR affects energy consumption, which reinforces its effects on emissions. And finally, the European Union's high dependence on imported fossil fuels, especially oil and natural gas, strengthens these relationships. In all this scenario, because we have talked about the European Union, we have discussed about the role of China. Later on, if you want, we can have some words concerning not only you, but also China. But as you know, it's crucial and very important, the position of the BRICS and the Global South. One of the main issues underlying the debate is the tension between climate justice and international trade rules. We have discussed about that also in previous forums. While the international community recognizes the urgency of taking drastic measures against climate change, the instruments chosen, for example, CBAMs, may have disproportionate consequences for countries still undergoing economic development. Instead of adopting CBAM unilaterally, alternative approaches are proposed nowadays in several papers. For example, strengthening voluntary carbon markets, multilateral agreements to harmonize sustainability standards, South-to-South cooperation in green technology transfer, and also positive rather than coercive incentives to decarbonize key industry sectors. It also suggests that a global carbon pricing mechanism could be created under multilateral bodies such as the United Nations to avoid trade distortions and to promote climate actions based on equity. But let me finish with 10, 12 main ideas, okay? And as a result of our research in our group. First, carbon pricing represents an essential tool in the fight against climate change, of course, we have no doubt, but its applications entail significant governance challenges. Instruments such as carbon taxes and emission trading system are crucial for mitigating greenhouse gases, although their success depends heavily on multilateral cooperation and coherence among national, regional, and global policies. Second, Currently, there is no consolidated global model of climate governance. While progress has been made, such as the Paris Agreement or other initiatives, the scenario remains fragmented with diverse regulatory frameworks and unharmonized methodologies. This disparity, of course, reduced the effectiveness of measures and creates inequalities between countries. Also, the geopolitical dynamic and energy security have a direct impact on carbon emissions. Factors such as geopolitical risk, we have already said it, and energy security risk affect emission levels in complex and sometimes also contradictory ways. In the European case, for example, ESR has proven to have a long-term influence, increasing dependence on fossil fuels. Also, the energy-intensive industries require deep international cooperation to effectively decarbonize. Key sectors such as steel, cement, and aluminium are fundamental to energy transition, but face technical and economic barriers. Initiatives like the Climate Club, created in 2023, offer a relevant coordination pathway through node without difficulties, of course. Concerning the European Union, you know our position itself as a leader in the structured application of carbon pricing instruments. Although the EU ETS system, the CBAM, and the Fit for 55 legislative package has established an advanced model. However, these policies have generated tensions with developing countries, which criticize their potential protectionism bias. Also, concerning emerging countries, I don't know if China is not an emerging country no more, but concerning the BRICS and BRICS Plus, they have adopted differential positions that reflect tensions between economic development and environmental responsibility. Although China has set relevant goals, such as achieving carbon neutrality by 2060, its strategy prioritizes internal stability. Likewise, the BRICS Plus question initiatives such as the CBAM due to their potential negative effects on their internal economies. Concerning the United States, you already know, still lacks a unified carbon pricing framework. So here we have several papers and studies, what's happening in California, Washington, for example. So a national carbon tax or trading system has not been established, mainly due to existing political divisions in the United States. It's because it's essential to move toward a coordinated, equitable, and technical robust international frameworks. Proposals such as establish a global minimum carbon price adjust to each country's level of development may constitute a viable solution. However, this must be accompanied by financing mechanisms, technical assistance, and of course, technological transfer to guarantee climate justice. For example, what's happened with IE, as you have already said. The dimension of climate justice must be placed at the center of the carbon pricing policies. If equity criteria are not incorporated, there is a risk that migration strategies will deepen existing inequalities. Therefore, climate governance is required that combines environmental ambition with distributed responsibility. It's because we need multilateral efforts, such as pricing initiatives promoted at international forums and transregional associations. As general reflection within the project framework, several members of our research group, we believe that climate fiscal instruments should have a primary extra fiscal purpose. That is, the objective should to discourage emission, not to collect revenue. So there is a need to review the European system in our own sources, considering taxes in strategic sectors such as rare earth. And finally, and that's my last point, from a technical perspective, the value of national and international databases must be highlighted as a tool for design more efficient and comparable policies. So thank you very much for giving me those minutes to share with you that ideas, and I will be very happy to hear your reflections. Of course, continue with the discussion. Thank you, Professor Mosquera.
Thank you so much, Professor Porras and Javier, I would say. Please call me Irma. But it's very nice to have your presentation and to have the geopolitics of it. I think it is important to see all the developments. And we will go now to a more specific tax issue, because actually we also see the role of tax incentives and here and how it influences also EI and sustainability. So then going from the international obligation, should we say, to the geopolitics of it, now we are going to the tax elements of tax incentives. And here we have Professor Mahmoud Abdellatif from Qatar University. Together, there are two colleagues of Qatar tax authorities, not colleagues from mine, but from Qatar tax authorities. And we will have a very interesting discussion. You will have also 20 minutes for your presentation, Mahmoud.
Yeah, I will share.
And you please share your presentation, and we will be here. Thank you so much.
What is, oh my God.
Otherwise, I can share it for you.
It's no, I did some updates to it.
So,
just a moment.
Please ask your questions in the chat. If you can put yourself mute.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, please ask your questions in the chat, and then after we will try to answer one of the questions during this presentation.
I share my presentation?
Yes, please do.
Yeah. Okay, where is...
no mic, but just you can share your presentation.
It's a middle one. Oh, where is...
Works. Yes. Oh, look, we are incomplete.
No, it's not.
If you can just go to the back. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Irma. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this session. Actually, the topic is interesting for me. I started working in tax incentive a long time ago. And I did a paper about research and development, and then general and specific tax incentive. But now we narrow down to a specific area, actually, which is tax incentive and data center. So when we talk about, my colleagues mentioned about environmental issues related to data center, in terms of energy consumption, in terms of water usage, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, and all those environmental issues draw our attention about the role of tax incentive. I will start broadly, like explaining how is tax incentives using some databases which available regarding tax incentive, and then go down to data centers and tax incentive. So here we have platform for collaboration for tax matter defines tax incentive as a deviation that you deviate from tax norms or from benchmark, and you give some special tax treatment to some group, some activities, some taxpayers based on specific criteria. And when you grant tax incentive, it means you forgone a specific amount of tax revenue. That is, we call it tax expenditure. So here, BCT, they develop, I think this is a recent report about principles for designing for tax incentive. And they put 6 items. When you think about tax incentive, you should justify why do we need tax incentive. You should think about what kind of tax incentive, international consideration, especially nowadays when we talk about Villar 2 and all international issues, tax competition. So all those issues we should consider. And legislation, whether we need tax incentive within tax legislation or within investment law or investment or special economic zone law. And then come to implementation and evaluation. I will go through three main items: design, implementation, and evaluation. Those more critical items when we think about data center and tax incentive. As you know that OECD, they have annual report regarding tax incentive, and this annual report focus on investment tax incentive. And most countries nowadays think that AI data centers are important, and especially in developing countries, they would like to attract data centers because of energy prices. When we compare energy prices in developed versus developing countries, is a big difference. So Jason mentioned about that many data center in India, in China, and maybe one of the reasons is energy prices. So they relocate to other countries. Here also they mentioned that the report, when they talk about tax incentives, they said there is a significant part of tax incentive related to sustainability, those sustainable development goal. When also we think about tax incentive, actually there are two models. When that is, we call it general tax incentive, we call it specific tax incentive. Also, sometimes they call it cost-based or income-based. The first one, tax exemption, is most common in developing countries. Is they give tax exemption for 10 years, for 5 years, or forever. Reduced tax rate, also this is another approach of tax incentive. Tax allowances, this is mostly implemented in developed world. So the first and second one, usually in developing countries. Third one, fourth one are in developed countries. So tax allowances like accelerated depreciation, R&D, tax expenditure, tax credits, usually in developed world. This is show you how is based on the report of OECD. This is show you how is the percentage of tax incentive. Out of 70 countries, you will find 89% they use tax exemption. 71% they use tax allowances. 67 they use reduced corporate income tax, and 33 use tax credit. So here it indicates that the most common one is tax exemption, and consider those group of countries mostly are emerging and developing countries. But when we consider OECD countries, we'll find the bulk of them, they use tax allowances and tax credit because they use what we call it cost-based tax incentive. So implementation of tax incentive is another issue actually. When we talk about design, we come to implementation. Who's going to implement tax incentive? Who's going to be approve it, eligibility criteria? And I do remember my colleague Jason, when he mentioned we need environmental assessment. Unfortunately, when we grant tax incentive, we don't care about this. We have some criteria which consider like size of investment or the outcomes, employment, local content. They have general eligibility criteria. And those eligibility criteria here, they think about those one, outcome. What is the output or the outcome of this project? Or they start by sector, which sector is going to get tax incentive? And to be honest with you, most developing countries, they think about technology, and they think about technology transfer, technology adaptation, and we need to attract those high-tech industries to contribute to our national development, to contribute to knowledge transfer. So you will find like data center, it will be one of those sectors which have a lot of tax incentive, regardless of environmental impact. Also, when we come to outcome, they think about what is the outcome in terms of the result or productivity. So here, this is one indicator to grant tax incentive. Another criteria here, special economic zones. We know that most economic zones are in developing world, and most data centers are relocated to free economic zone. Is that right? So this is actually another issue, that is, you would like to attract investment, and you encourage those data centers to relocate. And special economic zones, usually they are tax exempted for a limited period or forever, or sometimes they have special tax consideration. Geographic region. So some countries, they would like to develop some rural area, so they give tax incentive. Investment size, in terms of how much you invest, and what is like how much you bring to the country in terms of capital flow. New business, so here, if it is a new business or existing business, so usually here they think about new business, and they don't consider whether it's going to be expansion or there is value added to the economy, but it's just a new business. And then the last item here, they think about ownership, whether sometimes some countries, they limited their tax incentive to foreign direct investment. Some countries, they make it more general, but usually in most developing countries, they are so generous with foreign direct investment relative to local investment. This is how is tax incentive implementation. As I mentioned, that is sometimes tax incentive within tax legislation, and we find only 23% of samples like they have tax incentive within tax law. And multiple pieces of legislation, with this is include tax law, investment law, other laws. You will find the bulk of countries, 71, they have tax incentive scattered. We call it scattered. When you implement it, you should go back. Oh, this is in tax law, or this is investment law, free zone law. And even this complicated the process of tax compliance. When you think about how we are going to comply or how we are going to grant tax incentive. And only investment laws, those 6%. So we talk about designing, we talk about implementation. Now we would like to evaluate tax incentive. Actually, I rely on tax expenditure report, which issued by, I think, this is called the Center for Council for Economic Policies, and the other German one.
And the German Development Institute.
Yeah. So this is, I think, is a good report to show you how is tax expenditure, and even in terms of classification, which sector is benefiting from tax expenditure. I found also in this report, they have a special section about green tax expenditure. And this is what do we need when we think about data center and tax incentive. We need to see how is like tax incentive, or how much the government forgone tax revenue for environmental purpose. When we think also about tax expenditure, we should think that is not all countries, they have annual report for tax expenditure. This is another issue. As I mentioned here, that is, most developing world, they don't have a tax expenditure report. And I know some countries, they have 50 years, they granting tax incentive, and right now they don't have tax expenditure report. They just think that the benefits from tax exemption or tax incentive is outweigh its costs. So we should give tax incentive regardless of how much does it cost us. And here you can see how many countries worldwide they report tax expenditure. The green one number at lunch, and the this is brown one or red one. This is maroon. Is
Green.
No, the other
Maroon,
one. Yeah. So the other one is added since launch. We found increasing the number of countries that reporting tax expenditure, but the level of details is different from one country to another. This is the idea. You find some countries they have good practices, and some countries still at starting stage. And this is another challenge when we think about evaluating tax expenditure related to environment. So this is example of this is revenue for gun average by country. We have low income countries. We have revenue for gun as a percentage of GDP, revenue for gun as a percentage of total tax revenue. You will find the highest one is high income countries. As you can see here, you will find 39 countries, high income countries, and revenue for gun is 23.8 as a percentage of tax revenue. In terms of as a percentage of GDP is 4.7. And then if you move from right to the left, go to upper middle income countries, you will find a similar percentage for tax revenue for gun for as a percentage of total tax revenue, and as a percentage of GDP, it goes down, and so on. So here it reflects that most revenue for gun related to tax expenditure in developed countries. But I have a comment here. I think developed world or high income countries, they have long history of practices. Their figures are more accurate relative to low income countries. That's why you will find the percentage is higher relative to developing world. So green tax expenditure here, it can be defined as a treatment such as exemption, deduction, credits, deferrals, accelerated depreciation, and reduced tax rates that are implemented to protect the environment, in particular to achieve lower emission of greenhouse gas emissions, both directly and indirectly. Green tax expenditure contains information on 713 tax expenditure in this area, with the largest number related to those promoting electricity generation from renewable energy sources. They account for almost 1/4 of revenue for gun, the largest amount in this group. So let's have a look here. So this is electricity generation. You will find 300 related to renewable energy. Energy efficiency, 68. Electricity distribution, 43. And then transportation, you will find EV, that is have 113, biofuels, 54, public transport, real transport. So this is show you those electricity and transport are the major source of carbon emission, and the major benefit from tax incentive or green tax incentive. So when we think about how much here revenue for gun by tax expenditure targeting emission reduction, you will find public transport 18.3, you will find real transport, you will find electric vehicle, you will find biofuels, but go to electricity, renewable energy, 24, energy efficiency, and electricity distribution. Those indicating that there is some effort that government around the world pay attention to environmental issue in terms of tax incentive. But does this tax incentive encourage or discourage relocation or establishing data centers? This is a question. This is different types of tax incentive. How much does it cost in terms of indirect tax? This is value added tax, excise tax, and then go to income tax, corporate income tax, other tax, personal income tax, custom duties. This is actually how we can see the trend of tax expenditure related to environment. What I like to say to finalize, to end my presentation, as we know that there is general and specific tax incentive. Nowadays, as I mentioned at the beginning, that most data centers are relocating, moving from developed world to developing world, which means that is environmental issue is going to be exacerbated or be worsened in developing countries. In the meantime, developing world, they grant tax incentives. They don't discriminate or they don't consider environmental impact. And this is another issue. You give tax incentive to data center or to technological industry, or so here you should consider, as I mentioned, environmental assessment when you grant tax incentive. Also, we should find a way, actually, when we design tax incentives, this is my point of view, when we design tax incentive, we should think about energy efficiency, which industry is going to be more efficient in using energy. Also, when we think about a specific tax incentive related to research and development, we should consider those innovation or process which support or encourage energy efficiency. And this is, I think, like what I like to say in terms of the relation between or the influence of tax incentive on data center and related tax issues. So here there are two ways, actually, when we think tax incentive can have negative impact on environmental issue, consider relocation of data center from developed to developing world. On the other hand, if we consider environmental issue and design tax incentive in a way to serve environmental objective, then tax incentive can play a better role for minimizing the impact of environmental issue related to data center. Thank you for your attention. And if you have any question or comment, they are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Abdellatif, Mahmoud. So we have had 3 presentations. We have some time for some questions. I think that all 3 give different perspective of what is needed with AI and the use of data centers and what are the challenges from international geopolitics perspective and tax perspective. We will have the final session will be in sustainable green AI and taxation. And we have invited environmental and tax specialists, one from Francesco Ricciardi from the Asian Development Bank and Nate Berlin from the IMF. So I think that this is kind of like telling us that this is important, and next the policymakers will tell us how they are dealing with this. So at this moment, if you have any questions, also, I think that please, Jason will have a question here, and please feel to ask questions also in the chat, and I will take 1 or 2 questions. Please, Jason.
Thank you, Irma. Yeah, a question for Mahmoud, actually. Curious to hear a little bit more about the green tax expenditure. You said a big question is the impact this might have on the AI sector. Are there any sort of impact studies at this point? And perhaps are there any countries or best practice examples?
For environmental assessment?
Yeah.
Or actually, I'm not aware about it's a new area, especially when we consider environmental issues, sustainability, green tax. Right now, many developing world, let's think about the developing world that is I came from, they don't have environmental tax. This is one thing. And second thing, their tax incentive is not what we call it, is profit-based, is not cost-based, is more general, like unlimited tax exemption or free zones. And here you encourage, I think in the morning, someone said that is innovation, dirty innovation versus clean innovation. So when you design a tax incentive, for example, R&D tax incentive, okay, what is the criteria to approve R&D tax incentive? Is it dirty innovation or clean innovation when it comes to energy efficiency or renewable energy? Do you have specific tax incentive to encourage like such clean innovation? Or when it comes to another area which innovation have negative impact on environment? I think you don't discriminate, or you don't say, okay, this will have negative impact, or it will have positive impact. Whatever this is, it's a new innovation, and there is a scientific body is going to say, oh, this is, and really it's a new innovation. But what is environmental impact? This is the next question to get or to enjoy tax incentive. Okay.
Thank you so much, Jason. Any other questions in the chat? No, I think that one of the things what you mentioned also, Jason, I think the environmental impact assessment, that we will need to have a broader perspective of the tax incentive and whether there is environmental impact assessment and one of the conditions. And this could be done also a lot in the future, but also like kind of seeing how we are going to be responsible in terms of the use of EI. And that's what I think that the role of tax policy can also, and the work of the IMF will be presenting after the break, will take a lead on this. The idea of this workshop is not all to have all the answers, but to share the questions, to share the information that we have in all different aspects. So as I mentioned yesterday, we started with CBAM and the responses of countries. So for instance, Indonesia and Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan were also presented as case studies. And it will be interesting to see to what extent also this CBAM, EI, and sustainability will take a kind of leading role. So the idea of here is just having a very informative workshop in all the issues that we need to deal with. It's not only about CBAM, it's also about the consequences of the use of data centers in EI and environmental sustainability. So I think that Francesco, actually, you can also, you are writing a comment in the chat, you can say it in person, so please, you can put your camera on if you would like to.
Yes. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon from Manila, everyone. Yes. Thank you very much for the presentation. I am not an expert of taxation at all. I'll explain you later a bit. But I was intrigued by this comment on the environmental impact assessment, because it's something we do a lot, and you know, that's a very important factor to be considered, especially for the little I understand about taxation, is rather than focusing on a single project itself, a data center or a specific limited assessment of some specific areas. I believe it would be important for each country which is keen to develop this industry to perform a whole strategic environment assessment, which is not only environment, but is social. It includes a lot of different scenarios to be evaluated, and I think is an increasing importantly factor to be considered every time we speak about large strategic developments, like, you know, energy transition mechanism or something that actually goes beyond a single project itself. So I'm not aware of anything that has been done for AI developing in any country, but I think that will be definitely interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesco, because I think that you are completely right, and that's the reason why we think that not only Asia, we have also invited people from Africa, from Latin America to this workshop. We have invited policymakers, international law, tax law, environmental, economy. So it has to be more than one thing. And I think that it really shows that we need to be more comprehensive, and this strategic economic impact assessment would be a really good proposal. Thank you so much. So we will take a small break since we have some time. Sorry, Jason will have a response to you, Francesco.
If there's time.
Yes, of course, there is time.
Just very quickly, no, thank you very much, Francesco. I think that's an excellent point. And I do think EIA needs to be applied not only to specific projects, but also to policies and national strategies. I think, and Irma's comment made me think of a number of other channels, to incentivize EIA through tax policy, but you can also, require it through sort of pre-investment conditions.
Yeah.
I think bilateral and multilateral investment treaties have a role to play in this context. You can really require private actors to conduct environmental impact assessments. If we look at a lot of the bilateral investment treaties that African countries have signed in the last 5 to 10 years, these so-called new generation investment treaties, many of them come with environmental impact assessment provision. So there's a number of ways you can do this. A treaty, I think, is one, tax policy is another, pre-investment conditions is another again. So I think excellent points.
I will have a discussion with you because what we notice nowadays, many developing world are tolerant in terms of environmental measures, and they looking to reap the benefits of foreign investment in terms of creating more jobs, in terms of helping economic growth. But a few, they consider environmental impact.
Mm-hmm.
So this is another issue. Like, you think about positive aspect, positive or economic spillover, but you don't consider that the environmental issue or environmental like carbon emission or other related issue. And I'm not sure why they compromise. They compromise actually. And if we have assessment, I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, because most foreign investment go to developing world. Those industries like cement, steel, iron, and all those industries, they migrated because of environmental emission trading scheme in Europe. They migrated to the south. Remember yesterday, I think, Anna, we talked about how is in ETS, environmental emission trading scheme. Encouraged many industries those to migrate from here or to relocate from north to south, because south are more tolerant in terms of environmental measure. Okay, so this is
and that's also the idea of also having a similar workshop also for Africa and also for Latin America. Yeah. So we can share some experiences and having also people from Asia presenting. So this is quite nice. Thank you so much. We have 10 minutes for a break. So welcome, everyone. We will start in 1 minute from now. And we have already our 2 speakers for the final section of today. And actually the final session of the workshop. And our idea is to have today a discussion and kind of wrap up with the policymakers' perspective from environmental and tax law tax perspective, economics perspective, looking at how we look at the environmental sustainability EI. It is very clear that we need to have a comprehensive approach. We need to be more strategic, not only on one specific of data centers and EI, but also more than that. So I'm very happy to introduce the 2 speakers. Thank you so much for taking the time. Also, some of you are with leave. I say Nate. So thank you so much also as well for taking the time to present. I will give first the word to Francesco Riccardi. He is the Senior Environmental Specialist from the Asian Development Bank. And he has a proposal in Sustainable Green EI, and that's the reason why I thought that you could tell us a little about what is this proposal about. And I think it's important to look at the discussion that at the proposal that you presented, and look at what are the consequences. So thank you so much, Francesco. The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you very much, Irma. This is a pretty unusual audience for me, and that's why also I was very interested in joining you. Normally, I'm not used to speak to tax specialists. Normally, I speak with environment related personnel. So just very short introduction about myself. I'm an environment specialist in the Asian Development Bank based in Manila. What I do is mostly advising government and private company that are interested in getting financial support from the Asian Development Bank on how to achieve the highest possible standards in terms of environmental sustainability. That is not limited to specific infrastructure project. That can be, for example, energy project, roads, or something like this, but also policy. And what we will just discuss just before the break, for example, what could be the impact of wide development of artificial intelligence in a specific country, what can be done to mitigate the potential environmental impact, amplify the societal benefits. So AI, we know, is now becoming a very, very prominent actor in development world. For most of us, they're not specific expert of IT or large language models. Most of the time, it's just thinking about how we can streamline our work, how we can use better language in our emails. It's very useful for us, which are not English speakers or not native English speakers. But let's try in this short discussion that we are going to have together, how can we think about AI and the environment, how we can use AI not just for our work, but for wider goods on all the difficult situation that we are dealing with today. So our discussion today, I wouldn't say it's a talk, it's a discussion, I hope, is how the artificial intelligence can help us in rethink our environmental governance, right? And what should be the principle that guide the use of artificial intelligence. I would identify today 3 of them, which are transparency, inclusivity, ecological integrity. I will get back in a bit more detail about those later. So, sorry, just keep on. So why I think we need a new approach. Sorry, this was the previous slide. So why we need a new approach? So this is a very made up image of our GDP and biodiversity. Of course, it's not real number, but the concept is GDP can rise when ecosystem collapse. Okay. Take into consideration, for example, a forest. If you leave the forest like it is, the GDP is relatively low, maybe based on a collection of wood and other non-timber values from the forest, or maybe some of tourism. But if you cut the forest down, you actually can sell the trees, and your GDP for the specific moment will increase. And something that unfortunately has created this weird relationship between the growth of GDP that we know has created a lot of very nice, a very important positive outcome in terms of reduction of poverty, lifting people out of poverty, increasing the quality of life. At the same time, has been a driver, the economic growth has been a driver of ecological crisis and collapse. At the end of the day, the release of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is really a direct impact of our economic activity. So for most of the narrative that we are having today, and the narrative that AI is fed, I mean, AI and large language model at the end of the day are based on existing knowledge and existing material that's available. So those materials are mostly based on the absolute growth is necessary to keep the economy growing, not necessarily the health of people, of nature. So if we keep using this flow indicator, we will miss what is, I think, the real picture. No, we need an approach for us to recognize nature that is beyond money, and we need to feed AI with also this kind of values as well. This is where AI can really help, not just to replace the existing knowledge, but to expand on how we measure and understand the progress. So So, sorry, again, I have still have problem with my IT thing. So why I think AI is very important also for sustainable development. It matters because environmental governance is extremely complex. So think about the massive data set that we have to deal with: biodiversity surveys, climate data, climate projection, trade of commodities, social impacts. So there is really a huge complexity that is very difficult to process, even having very large team of people working on it. So AI can help us, of course, in handle complexity, in filling data gaps, in making decisions that are not just efficient, but possibly, if the AI is well trained, also fair. So especially for developing countries where it happens, I work a lot, AI could really a way to leapfrog traditional barriers of knowledge and capacity inside the country. But also we need also to take consideration that has to be used wisely. And also not everything that we heard about AI is reality. Some of them is really still imagination. Let's be realistic. There is a lot of hype around it. What we need to do now is separate what is we can do, what it cannot do. Also in the environmental development. So, for example, I give you a number of examples that really been useful. I can analyze, classify species from images. When I started my studies after 3 years, I did an internship in an institute that was studied dolphins in the sea close to Venice, in front of Venice. And the only way to understand the population of the dolphin was to take a photo of the dorsal fin where there are scratches that identify as each individuals. So my job was to go photo by photo, try to remember the scratches of every fin, is to see if in other photos the scratches were the same. So it was a way to do mark and recapture. So to understand how the individual was moving, there was some statistical method to identify how large the population would be. Now those kind of analysis will take probably 10 minutes instead of 6 months, and will be done with far more scientific accuracy. So what AI or the weather cannot tell us is which values we need to prioritize, which ethical settings, ethical limits we should implement. We need to feed AI in this context. So it cannot replace people in taking decisions. It cannot represent, for example, indigenous knowledge that we know is so important in a sustainable development, such as indigenous people are the custodians of the remaining very high value habitats in the world. So it's like to say, in a case, AI is a microscope and it is not a scientist. So it gives us clarity, but it cannot replace our own judgment. However, the results that we have in environmental science are really impressive so far. I'm really curious to see what's going to happen. So it's already happening, for example, in biodiversity conservation. Camera traps, this camera that you place in the forest, that you leave them there, it collects photos of animals or wildlife around, can help, with the help of the AI, can help tracking the movement of elevated species. You can use acoustic sensor to listen to bird or aquatic animals to identify where they are, how they are moving. DNA analysis can help detecting species from drops of water simply, and satellite images are really helping to mapping forest and habitats at planet scale. Just recently, AI identified some colony of penguins in Antarctica that were not identified before. So this is, AI can really scale our ability to see and protect the nature that is not protected so far. However, there are still a lot of problems. There are still underlying problems that may affect, in a way, AI judgment. First of all, is the market bias. So for too long, still, I think, at least this is my opinion, nature has been treated as a commodity. Now you can trade it. There is a lot of talks about using biodiversity credits, where actually you can really trade your credits in a similar way of carbon credits have been used so far. The growth, I thought about the growth concept. So in some cases, GDP can rise while ecosystem collapse at the same time. There is another important concept, which is the avoided loss fallacy. For example, if you think about the carbon credits, right, that some of those are based on avoided loss, means you receive credits if you protect a forest that you in theory think that in future maybe fell down. So this creates really only is a kind of some way of accounting trick, in my opinion, and create paper benefit, not real ecological gains. But this is very much mainstream in most of the carbon credit literature, and also in some of these mechanisms, these pledges from the private sector to achieve the non-net loss or net zero of carbon. So another very important one, exclusion. So indigenous and traditional knowledge that are so important are often ignored in the training system of artificial intelligence. So if AI is really built on this flow foundation, there is likely the possibility that will amplify the very problems that it claims, so we want it to solve. So going back to the three pillars I was talking at the beginning, I think they are the most important ones that we need to consider while using AI for sustainable development. So how do we move forward? First is transparency. So AI must be explainable and accountable. If people cannot understand how decisions are made, also based on AI, we cannot build trust with the community. The second is inclusivity. I mentioned it before. AI governments must involve not just some very powerful actors, but also involve the local community, indigenous people, civil society, not just, as I say, corporation or large government. Third is the ecological integrity. So nature must value more than the money it produces. Cultural or societal benefit are not always reflected in the accounting sheet. So AI should also be able to consider and reflect the richness of ecosystems of the environment and not just reduce them to carbon or simple commodity. So my belief is these three pillars are the foundation to build ethical artificial intelligence in environmental governance. Let me also ask you a few, let's call them ethical questions when we are talking about the use of AI in environment governance. So I think we should ask ourselves some of these questions. For example, who owns the environmental knowledge? Is it what we call the global north, or is the community living with its biodiversity every day? Do we want to prioritize efficiency, like most of the economic models are made of, or do we want to also consider justice, the fairness that this action and decision are to be taken related to local communities? So can we accept that AI is really objective, or in reality is reflecting, this algorithm reflecting what are the human bias? There is also a paradox. I heard the previous presentation was very interesting, right? This is the energy cost of the artificial intelligence. Is it ethical to burn enormous amount of energy and water just to run AI models that are designed in theory to save the environment? This is not just, technical questions. There are political, cultural, moral questions that we really need to address. So let me finish. So what we do with all of this? Now, AI, I'm sure everyone is aware that will shape our future, that will shape the way we work, and we shape the environment and the social landscape in the future. This is very certain, I think. The real question for us at this point is how do we guide? How do we encourage the ethical use of artificial intelligence? If we continue down the path of extraction of resources, market efficiency, that has, of course, driven very high GDP growth, but also driven a pretty much widespread ecological collapse, then we may have a problem, right? Or can we choose in an alternative, use these three pillars that I was talking about: transparency, inclusivity and ecological integrity. This is not just, I think, a technological knowledge. It's not just technological challenge. It's not just how we train the large language model to provide us with the answer that we want. It's a moral question, I think. No? And if we succeed, I think AI can really become, I would say, a catalyst for a systemic change. That's really what we need at this point. A tool that may help us to protect biodiversity, to fight climate change, and to achieve fairer societal benefits with economic growth. So the choice, I think, is ours, and I hope that people in your field can help the development of this framework where taxes are extremely important to drive sustainable development and to avoid that the money that is being collected by the government end up in activities actually counterproductive for the environment and for sustainable development. With this, I finish, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Francesco, also for giving us the other side of AI and how it can contribute to sustainability. But I think that it really shows that sometimes we have to be careful with AI, using it for environmental, but at the same time, the challenges of for environmental from the use of AI. It's kind of the double side. And I think that was what Jason was mentioning as well. So I'm very happy that you took the time also to give us your presentation. There are also some papers already in the programs for people who want to explore a little more on this. And that's the reason why I was motivated by your work to give and to ask you to give a presentation. And then I go back again to the tax part, and then I will have the final speaker for this workshop, and that is Nate Vernon-Lin, who is economist in the Climate Policy Division of the Fiscal Affairs Department at the IMF. So please, Nate, the floor is yours. For everyone, you can raise your questions in the chat or raise your hand. We may have time for some questions. Please, Nate, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So my name is Nate Vernon-Lin. I'm an economist at the IMF, mostly focusing on climate-related issues and taxation. So I'll be presenting analysis from a paper that myself and a colleague, Shafiq Hibus, recently published in Energy Economics that focuses on the climate implications of both cryptocurrency mining and artificial intelligence, and then potential policy responses that governments can take. Just one caveat is a lot of the analysis is related to cryptocurrency mining, but we think that some of these lessons are kind of quite important for artificial intelligence, and some of the related policies are relevant for both. So I'll start with just a brief kind of overview of quantitative assessment of the climate impacts, then want to have the bulk of the presentation be on the potential policy responses. So I'm not sure how much of this has been covered in the previous sessions, but just want to kind of emphasize that why do cryptocurrencies and artificial intelligence generate environmental impacts? So both use large amounts of energy to power computations and cool equipment. So in the case of AI, this is electricity used to train and use models, while in cryptocurrency mining, it's the use of electricity to solve complex mathematical puzzles. And just to put this in perspective, processing one single Bitcoin transaction requires as much as electricity as the average German household uses in 3 months. So it's a large amount of electricity. For AI, for example, a single chat GPT query uses about 10 times more electricity than kind of a traditional Google search. There are some kind of key distinctions across different protocols used for cryptocurrency mining, but I think I won't go into those in detail. In terms of the geographical importance, so most data centers in 2024 were located in the United States. This is according to data from Statista. But that's not to say that in countries that don't make up a large kind of global share, that data centers are not extremely important. So for example, in Ireland, which does not show up in this list of top countries, it was estimated that around 22% of national electricity use was consumed by data centers. So extremely important from a macroeconomic perspective. For cryptocurrency mining, the bulk of it in 2022, the last year of available data was in the United States, China, and Kazakhstan. And this electricity consumption is associated with environmental issues through two pathways that I'll mention here, but more in practice, greenhouse gas emissions and the associated climate damages that come from electricity produced based on fossil fuels. And then another quite important one, especially in countries that rely a lot on coal-powered electricity generation, is local air pollution. Fossil fuels will emit these small particulates that are small enough to enter our bloodstream and can cause lung and heart disease. And this is one of the leading causes of deaths in many Asian countries, and also can be particularly bad for electricity produced based on oil products. So for just how do we estimate electricity consumption and greenhouse gas emissions from these technologies? For cryptocurrency, we estimate the energy efficiency of mining equipment. We combine this with observed data on the number of computations for all cryptocurrencies. And then further combine that with data on emissions intensity per unit of electricity. That data comes from the International Energy Agency, and we use the national average in some cases or regional average electricity intensity. So like grid level electric emissions intensity in the case of the United States. For artificial intelligence, we have data on the number of data centers by country, electricity used per data center, and then we combine this again with emissions per unit of electricity from the IEA. I will skip over this slide, the details of this slide, but just to say for cryptocurrency mining, and this is relevant for AI as well, what we did is we explicitly modeled the profit function that cryptocurrency miners face. And the main takeaway is that, so in the case of cryptocurrency, they have higher revenue when cryptocurrency prices increase, which causes their more miners to enter the market, more electricity to be consumed. When electricity prices increase, their costs increase, which leads to a reduction in cryptocurrency mining activity. And this is one way where tax policy can kind of work through to reduce electricity demand through the electricity price mechanism. And if we take a look at the numbers in terms of the kind of global impact of these technologies, so for cryptocurrency mining in 2024, we estimate that the total emissions were around 140 million tons. So this is about 0.4% of global emissions and around the amount of the Philippines or Bangladesh. So significant. In terms of AI, the global emissions were estimated to be about 0.35%. And then collectively, these two technologies are about 0.75% or that of Thailand. And then we also project the emissions from these technologies going forward. In short, they're projected to rise, but this does, of course, depend heavily in the case of cryptocurrency on developments in cryptocurrency prices, and then AI, just kind of the use of the technology, but also the energy efficiency of the equipment used. But in the more high case scenario, which seems to be actually more likely to materialize based on recent developments, these two technologies would make up around 6% of electricity use in 2027 globally, and 2% of global CO2 emissions. So the growing issue from a climate perspective, and also something that individual countries need to grapple with. So I want to spend the kind of bulk of the presentation on this slide, which is trying to summarize key policy responses. I start with just this table that compares 3 potential fiscal or regulatory policy instruments across key attributes that policy makers care about. So the different policies are shown in the columns, and then the rows show these different attributes that policymakers care about, such as the environmental impact, these top 4 rows, and then other things like fiscal impact, administrative practicality, political acceptability, and so on. Before going into the details, it's useful to think about the key pathways that greenhouse gas emissions can be reduced when these technologies are used. So these are split into 3 mechanisms or pathways. The emissions intensity of electricity that's used, the energy efficiency of the AI or crypto equipment and processes, and then the total quantity of AI and crypto activity. But then you also want to think about the leakage risk. So if it becomes less profitable to be done in one country due to environmental policies, there's some risk that the activities will shift to other locations, still generate these environmental or global environmental costs. So in terms of carbon pricing, this works by either applying a tax on each ton of CO2 emitted when electricity is produced, or through a cap and trade system like emissions trading scheme. So this promotes all 3 kind of key pathways to reduce emissions. However, there is this leakage risk that's present unless the carbon pricing is coordinated across countries. It generates revenue. It would be applied at the kind of whole power sector level. It's difficult to apply just to a specific end user of electricity. But straightforward administratively when done as a carbon tax, but there can be political acceptability concerns because this does increase prices. And this is potentially particularly an issue for AI when it's viewed as a national security issue. Countries want to promote this. So it needs to be complemented by other policies, likely from a political perspective. And I'll mention that later in the presentation. A second instrument is a tradable performance standard, or fee-bait, where you provide a sliding scale of subsidies to firms that have emissions intensity below the industry average, and a sliding scale of taxes on more emissions intensive firms. So this provides a strong incentive to improve the energy efficiency of AI and cryptocurrency activities. It does not do a great job of improving the emissions intensity of the power sector in general, although it could be complemented with some type of credit or incentive for individual AI firms investing in renewable energy, for example, or buying renewable portfolio standard certificates. Some caveats around this that could be discussed. And then it does not really, since it does not create increase in costs for the average firm, it should not have a large impact in overall activity in AI or cryptocurrency. And also because of this, it has limited leakage risks across countries. So it's less likely that these activities would migrate to another country. From a fiscal perspective, it's revenue neutral. It could be applied just to specific kind of electricity intensive industries like AI, a little bit more administratively difficult, but likely more politically acceptable. And one example of this was proposed in the US under this Clean Cloud Act of 2025, if anyone wants to look into details. Then the third option is just a kind of standard electricity tax, which could apply to specific sectors like AI or cryptocurrency mining. And it's effective in promoting energy efficiency improvements. It does increase costs, so it results in these leakage risks and potentially political acceptability concerns, but it does generate revenue as a side benefit. So these are kind of three more like sector-wide policies, but then we think they would need to be complemented with additional policies. So this would include things like time of use electricity pricing, which can help, reduce the increase in peak load for the power system and encourage investment in batteries that shift supply to times of higher demand. And ideally, it would be applied across all large electricity users. So even if there's not opportunities to shift electricity demand in the AI sector, for example, other sectors of the economy would have this incentives, which would overall reduce kind of the strain on peak demand. In general, for things that generate positive externalities, so like learning spillovers, you would want to have research and development subsidies in place, and this can partly, help alleviate maybe some political acceptability on concerns around if carbon pricing is, the policy that is pursued. And then other things like energy efficiency requirements are present in a few countries. Some countries also condition subsidies based on energy efficiency performance, reporting of energy use and environmental impacts, just in general structural policies to promote investment in power sector generation and transmission. And then we think about these local air pollutants, pricing of these local air pollutants as well. So I think I'm kind of running out of time. This slide is specific to cryptocurrency mining, and we modeled the impact of different policies on emissions and revenue. But just to say that in the case of cryptocurrency, it's extremely effective. Electricity tax would be extremely effective in reducing emissions from the sector, since there's large opportunities to improve energy efficiency. This is, I think, at least for me, an open question for artificial intelligence activities, but we kind of assume it's also the case. And then to conclude, just to say that these are important sources of electricity demand and climate emissions, and they're expected to grow in the future. They can present, specific difficulties for individual countries. And a mix of policies is likely needed to help balance the strain on the electricity grid, environmental impacts, and also political acceptability. From the kind of standard economist view, carbon pricing is the most effective policy in promoting emissions reductions. It also, since it can apply across the economy, it helps you kind of allocate where the emissions reductions are coming from, that they come from the cheapest places. So you can minimize the overall economic impact of achieving an emissions reduction target. But the political acceptability especially is constrained in some countries. So other policies like tradable performance standards and fee-based have quite desirable characteristics. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nate. I think that thank you to Francesco and also to you for the two presentations. It gives us what I mentioned, the two sides. So how we can use AI, but still have to comply with sustainability, but at the same time, what are the risks and how we design in tax policy. So this is a nice way to end our workshop. If you have any questions, and I also I replied to in the chat that we will upload the slides 2 weeks from now. We will ask to the speakers to kindly share with us the slides, because I think that there is a lot of information, and we will also have the recording. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please raise your hand or ask the questions in the chat. Jason, do you have a question?
Not at this point. Not at this point.
No.
Yeah.
Just because with all the discussion we are having, I was wondering whether Jason from International Law will have a question.
Maybe on the slide that Nate presented about the calculation of emissions data, I wondered how widespread that methodology is, and also how extensive it is, in the sense that does it take into account supply chain emissions, scope 1, 2, and 3, for example. I'm just curious to learn a little bit more about how the IMF goes about that.
Yeah, so for the approach we took for cryptocurrency mining, this is, I think, kind of the standard approach, and several other publications have taken it. So we just replicated it. For AI, I mean, we did this about 1.5 years ago, and things have changed, are changing so quickly that really don't know exactly how it compares to the common approach, but we made sure that it was in line with what the IEA was presenting at the time. And in terms of the comprehensiveness, it's just related to the emissions that come from producing the electricity used by these firms.
Thank you so much. Any other questions? Well, I have a question to Nate, but it's more from regarding to the presentation of Mahmoud. We will talk about tax incentives also for green investments, and also the work has been done before on tax incentives. But what I think is that, Nate, if you have looked at everything, how do we see the tax incentive, what we'll need to have if we still want to have a new in this new sustainable environmental, we need to how we can see that. Can you share some of your thoughts, because you may have thought about it as a tax economist, and normally you think what could be the good solution, of at least a proposal. I hope I don't put you on the spot.
Let me try to answer, but also any kind of follow-up responses would be interesting. So I think from the broader like climate policy perspective, if you do have in place, a strong carbon price that captures the negative externalities associated with emissions, this should level the playing field between kind of dirty and clean sources. And there's not much need for tax incentives, for example, reduce, VAT rates for renewable energy equipment, and so on. But you would still want some incentives in place for like R&D, things that have positive externalities associated with them. But I think in reality, there's very few countries, maybe the EU would be the main exception, where there's carbon price that is at the level needed to achieve your climate targets. So tax incentives, can help fill in this gap. They're kind of more politically acceptable, definitely, than pricing. And then you want to do kind of, I think, the standard tax incentive analysis that was mentioned, also looking at the distributional impacts of them.
Thank you so much. I think that you are very brave trying to give that answer, because I think that we are in a new area of tax incentives, and it's important to consider those. And that's also the idea, because actually in the EU, they have now the Green Deal, and they are discussing also, I believe 2 weeks ago, something the Commissioner Hoekstra was also mentioning that, and they may go towards a tax incentive in the Green Deal. So thank you so much. I will have a final question for Francesco, because I'm very curious. We have in the EU, we have a lot of sustainable development provisions in terms in the EU economic partnership agreements, trade agreements. We have an EU sustainable development agreement with Angola, for instance, and now we are talking about sustainable green EI. So have you any look at what the EU is asking now to the other countries, and how do you see that from an Asia perspective? Or what would you say to the EU policymaker who is negotiating these agreements?
Irma, no, I don't have specific information on the agreement that you mentioned, but a big thing in Asia, for example, is the agreement on palm oil. and Malaysia, where of course the EU is requiring the demonstration that is sustainably sourced, and then it's a lot of political complexity around which standard you choose to use as a proxy for sustainable. And of course, some countries have their own standards and maybe don't necessarily align with what the EU is required. So it's really a matter of, in my opinion, of agreeing on what we actually mean by sustainable and what is important for both, for achieving for both parties, because there are several aspects in Asia where economies is very much reliant on smallholder farmers, for example, or small entities, where you don't want to penalize them too much in terms of, because they don't have the means to, for example, to be achieve this international certification that the EU may require. So I think all this policy really need to have a focus on what means for people and environment together. You can't really say at some point put a blanket ban on a specific commodity or a specific policy of development without considering the in-country specific economic landscape, which is very different depending on the country you are dealing with. So I think that Europe has a very strong leverage, commercial and cultural leverage for some country as well. So it should really use well, and the consultation with this country and avoid the conflicts, because sometimes nationalism then come up very strongly, are very important, because we don't want to set aside what is the green development, if you want to talk like that, and helping these countries to keep the natural resources sustainably used, just because you have a blanket ban or because you impose your own policy on them. That's at least the perspective I can see from where I sit in Asia.
Thank you so much, Francesco. And we have, for the final perspective from international law, Jason would like to comment on that. And that would be our final intervention. Please, Jason, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was just curious to dig in a little bit deeper to this point that Francesco made about the trade-off between the benefits of using AI for environmental monitoring, and of course the negative externalities that come from that. Is it worth using AI to monitor environmental degradation if the negative externalities outweigh that? Is there any sort of systematic methodology to take that into account, to appraise that trade-off? Is that done at the country level? Are there any best practices at the moment, or is this an appeal you're making? Be curious to hear.
It's a really new field. Thank you for the question, because it's not really something we were prepared until this year. I think nobody was anticipating this massive explosion of the use of AI. Maybe someone was, but was not mainstream. So we are jumping in something which is very, very unknown, and we heard from Nate and from other people that the costs in terms of environmental costs, not just economic or financial costs, are massive. So we discussed before the strategic impact assessment. I think is a very powerful framework that has been used in other sectors. We just completed, for example, a strategic assessment of geothermal energy development in Indonesia. I did another one personally, not personally, but so my colleagues and me, around the sustainable use of water resources in the Solomon Islands. And these are incredibly powerful tools if used properly, because you can really understand what you are allowed to do in a sustainable way, where the trade-offs come from, how you can mitigate the impact that you have. So this massive use of energy, for example, how we can mitigate that. Can use maybe just renewable resources to feed into this massive data center, or disincentivize the use of fossil fuels to fuel in a way, these data centers. But it is a very long discussion with the in-country actors. They are mostly interested, different ministries. You can talk with Ministry of Finance for the economic development. You can talk with the Ministry of Environment. You can talk with the Ministry of Land, because, for example, large infrastructure of energy production like wind or solar, very much depending on how much land you want to use, and which is the trade-off between using land for energy against land for agriculture, for example, and the food security. So it's an incredibly complex exercise to be done, but it's very important that we do it now rather than, I think, waiting until everything is boom and we realize that we made some mistake and we need to adjust our target for the future. So they would align, I think, the rightfully desire of a developing country to develop in this environment, at the same time helping them to mitigate and compensate for the damage that inevitably is going to be made.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think that I just leave you with two things that normally we will like to address, but will be part of another workshop perhaps. But also, like what you were mentioning, Francesco, about being the country knowing what they need to do, and this kind of country ownership that is different to what the AU of any other international institutions in general, but specifically the AU and the country ownership. And you need to have this assessment, what you say overall. And I think that that's very important, but also the policy coherence, because we do have the AU and some countries, for instance, the Netherlands, Belgium, they have this policy coherence for development, but we need to do a little more on that, how we make sure that what you say, talking to the Minister of Finance, Land, Industry, and so forth, and having all this is very important. So with those two thoughts that I may have, because I'm not the expert, but I think that these are very interesting discussions today. Thank you to Nate, thank you to Francesco, to all the speakers, but I will give the word now to Sandeep to conclude this workshop. As I mentioned, the slides and the recording will be available soon. I already shared in the chat where it will be available in the GLOBTAXGOV. It's a project that we investigate global tax governance, and we have already some work on that. First time on CBAM, but we have done something on sustainability. So Sandeep, the word is for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Irma. So I'll be very brief so that we don't go beyond 6. First, a very big thank you to you and to colleagues from Qatar and all other participants from ADB and from other organizations. Thank you very, very much for joining this seminar on behalf of ADB, and thank you for sharing all your knowledge. But the biggest thanks of all has to be for Irma, because she did all the heavy lifting and organizing, including handling the registrations herself. So a big, big thank you from all of us to you. And thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the sessions and the exchange of knowledge. And we hope to do something again, maybe next year together.
Thank you so much, Sandeep. Yeah, thank you everyone, and thank you for being here. And with this, we conclude the workshop. So it's a pleasure. And from Leiden Law School, Leiden University, with some representatives of Qatar, and also university and Qatar authorities, Indonesia, international law, and all of you, thank you so much. So with this, we will conclude, and thank you. Have a nice afternoon, evening, morning, whatever it is. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye.